wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host for the program. We have a very interesting guest today, but before we get into the interview, I'd like to remind everyone that our podcast is made possible with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, on the program today, we'll be hearing an interview that I did with Joy Sorensen-Navarre. Joy is the founder and president of Navigator, which is a national consulting company. Their sole purpose is to advise and assist physicians with management of their student loan debt. Not only physicians, but also large healthcare companies will hire Navigate to help physicians deal with their education debt, and their clients are on track to save $97 million on their student loans. This interview was a real eye-opener for me because of what I learned about the complexity of student loan process. So now, let's hear that conversation with Joy Sorensen-Navarre, president of Navigate. Well, Joy Sorensen-Navarre, let me begin by saying thank you very much for being with us today and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here to talk about my favorite topic.
Well, we're excited to have you. Our listeners have already heard in the introduction a little bit about what Navigate does, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to go back and get a little preliminary information about you. It's my understanding that your college degree was in social work. Is that correct?
That is true.
And so my question is, I think if somebody asked me to name all the things that a social worker does, loan management would probably not enter my list. So if you can just tell us a little bit about the process of evolving into a provider of student loan advice.
That is a terrific question. I'm going to give you my why. How's that? Because my why for social work is the same as my why for student loan relief. And that's that place where my heart's, greatest happiness and the world's biggest problems come together. Right. And so in social work for me, it was mental health. I was a mental health caseworker and loved helping people find stability most of the time and safety and long-term health. And that path took me to executive leadership of nonprofits, and part of that was fundraising, and part of that was public policy change. Part of that was being a registered lobbyist. So I love social work because it's very broad. You've got the micro, right, and then the macro. And it was when I was doing the fund development that I realized that, wow, people who had been smart about their money could then use their money to do the things that really made a difference in the world or helped them do what they wanted to do to create, a better world for people. And that's how I got from helping into money. And then I was a financial advisor for nearly a decade, and I had lots of clients who were physicians and pharmacists, and they had big student loans. And in order to help them, I got smart. And that's how Navigate was born.
When I think about this issue of student loans, I think that hardly a day ever goes by, certainly not more than a week goes by, that I don't hear a little news blurb here and there about student loan, student debt, this and that. But it seems like it's no more than just that, just a little bit of a blurb. And it doesn't seem to create a tremendous amount of excitement, yet you keep hearing about it. So I got to think that it really is a fairly substantial problem. So tell us a little bit about the stats. How much debt have we got, particularly in the medical world, and how are we dealing with it?
The statistics on student debt are very specific when it comes to physicians and people in medical school. We know that today, probably somewhere between 75 and 80% of everyone that goes to medical school takes on medical education debt. And the size of that debt can range dramatically. And what we see most often, now we consult with physicians all across the country every day, and the most common range of numbers that we're seeing right now in terms of student loan balance is $250,000 to $450,000 of medical education debt.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is really heavy for folks. And neither one of those numbers is an outlier. That's the most common range. We sometimes see a little less, sometimes 150, rarely 150, sometimes 220. We commonly see 500, 550, 600 for people who have long periods of training and fellowship, because the student loan interest rates are relatively high. And so then during periods of lower income, when people are on income-driven repayment plans or in forbearance, the interest increases dramatically.
I think it goes without saying that practically nobody, almost nobody, ever anticipates that they're going to get into trouble when they borrow money. So what can you tell us about how it goes from I'm going to take out this loan to get my education to how am I going to manage this debt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think what's most surprising to people, physicians tell us that's what's most surprising to them, is that they took out maybe 150, 180, but they don't realize that on these graduate education loans, that the interest isn't subsidized. And so every day the interest is accruing and piling up. There's a technical term for you. And so even when they're still in school, even when they're in training, these loan balances are increasing. And so what I think that a lot of people who may be listening that perhaps are later on in their career, or maybe they're thinking about taking a leadership track, people sometimes aren't aware of the burden that it is for a physician with these student loans. So do you mind if I just share some numbers?
I would be happy for you to.
Okay, thanks. So let's just imagine that, we have a good friend, we do, who's an early career physician. They've finished their 3 years of residency. They're starting out as an attending physician. It would be really common that their loan balance would be about $300,000. And if they want to pay off that student loan within 10 years, which is the goal for most physicians today, to be done paying on those loans before their kids are going to college, is often what they tell us, they have to pay $3,500 a month just on the student loan payment. And I don't think that people outside of the circle of physicians understand how heavy that burden is. People say it's like having a second mortgage, or buying my house twice, or buying two houses, depending on what part of the world you live in. And so it can feel really heavy, like we said earlier in our conversation.
Well, it's really interesting to me. You brought up the analogy of a home mortgage. Typically, in my experience, when you take out a home mortgage, there is a lengthy period of investigation and financial disclosure and so forth. But when you come to closing, you actually get a statement that tells you exactly how much you're going to have to pay every month, how much of that is interest, how much is principal, and how long it will take you to pay it off if you pay at this rate throughout the life of the mortgage. And it sounds to me as if when you get a student loan, there is nothing of that sort that enters into the conversation at all.
Well, there is something, and your listeners might chuckle at this. There's something called an exit interview. And this is mandatory at the end of medical school. Everyone needs to go through a student loan or financial aid exit interview. And at that time, lots of information is disclosed. And it might have a statement similar to what you just disclosed that would have some numbers of total amount borrowed and interest rate and projected payoff, total dollar amount. But the problem is that exit interview, even though it's looking at the physician borrower's specific numbers, it doesn't take into account the physician's career path or life plans or all these other variables that will change what their monthly payment amount might be, how long they might want to pay these off, if they're going to be using public service loan forgiveness or a different kind of program. So that really, it is true that physicians don't have the information they need from which to make an informed decision on these student loans.
So I'll just ask for an opinion on this right now. We're of course, free to think and say what we like. Is it possible that one piece of the solution to the problem would be to be sure that people are informed about exactly what the repayment process will be like? And if we did that, maybe they would not borrow as much money? Or what do you think? Do you have any suggestions at this point?
Mm-hmm. The question of how much to borrow. It is very unusual, not unheard of, for folks studying in the medical education to take out less than the amount that's offered every semester. And the problem is that, people don't have the time to be working, to be making their own money, right? And so, and there are lots of things that impact, a medical student's life, especially towards the end of their medical training, related to traveling for residency programs, related to exams and exam prep and all of those things that are very costly for a physician or almost a physician. We do see sometimes if people have a family situation where there's a parent or a grandparent who has the ability to assist with student loans. At those times we see, either no student loans or a lower amount of student loans. But otherwise, and the choice of which medical school to go to, what kind of medicine to pursue, whether MD or DO, all those things will impact the amount that a physician will end up borrowing.
So if you were going to put together a list of top 3 common mistakes, let's say, when a person is about to take out a student loan, can you come up with a list of 3 for us? Or if you want to give us 10, we'll hear that as well. But what's on your list?
The thing that comes to mind immediately is what I heard from a mid-career physician talking to a group of residents, and the topic was financial planning. And he told this whole group, it was over 200 physicians in residency, that his biggest mistake was taking out this sort of a bridge loan that was offered at the end of medical school before residency. It was called a residency loan. And that loan was not a lot. It was $10,000. And he said he ended up, at that time, he loved fixing old cars. And so he said he blew the money. That was his term. He blew the money on used car parts. And it took him $15,000 or $20,000 to pay back the $10,000 that he had received. So I guess the moral of that story is, don't be frivolous maybe with your student loan money. And his message was just take what you need and don't take any extra. That would be the number one. The second that comes to mind would be, it would be important to take your career path into mind when you're deciding what types of student loans to get.
Which is really hard, don't you think? For I know personally, so many people that start a residency program thinking that this is going to be it, only to change their mind once, if not 2 or 3 times. Do you find that that there is a good bit of that going on?
That's a very good point. There is.
And without having that sure knowledge, it makes it much more difficult to plan effectively.
To do the planning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, that takes care of my second tip then. To finish my thought, so for people that do have a clear career path, which would not be the majority. So say, for instance, we have someone in mind that really wants to end up at a teaching facility, right? They want to be involved in leadership and in being a faculty position, right, for a residency program in whatever field of medicine they choose. Now, that person is someone that really would stand them well to take out federal loans rather than private loans, because in a course of study such as this, or in a course of career such as this, that person would likely be eligible for public service loan forgiveness, and only federal loans qualify for that program. The private loans don't. So for people in the opposite situation, if they have, a parent who has their own private practice and they know that, most likely are going to end up, joining their parent or someone else in their community, perhaps, to practice with them. In that case, the public service loan forgiveness would not be an option typically. And so then you have a broader choice of what kind of loans to take out.
All right. Well, you're squarely into some territory that I would really like to hear some more about, because there's been a lot of talk about public service loan forgiveness. It was interesting to me. I was out of the country for a couple of weeks last month, and literally the day that I returned, actually the day after I returned, I heard a story on National Public Radio about the controversy about whether or not the funding for public service loan forgiveness is even going to survive. So, if you will, give us a little explanation about exactly what PSLF is and what is the current state of its probability for survival.
Public service loan forgiveness is a free federal program that was created in 2007 to encourage people to seek employment in the nonprofit and governmental sectors. We know that typically salaries in those sectors are less than in the private corporate world, and so Congress wanted to encourage people to work in the public sector. And so they created this loan forgiveness program, which requires 120 on-time monthly payments, so 10 years basically of payments. And these payments need to be on time. They also need to be on a qualifying repayment plan, on the right type of loans, and made while the borrower is working full-time for a qualifying employer. And so the rules are very clear right now. I've explained these rules thousands of times, probably on the phone and on conversations like this. And we are really confident that today the rules are very clear and very well known. Unfortunately, back in 2007, 2008, 2009, when the first group of people were starting to think about pursuing public service loan forgiveness, the rules weren't even written down.
Wow.
The forms were not available. Congress hadn't been specific to the Department of Education. The Department of Education hadn't laid out criteria and guidelines for their loan servicing contracted organizations like Fed Loan Servicing. And so at the beginning, people were just trying to do their best if they heard about it. In fact, most people didn't even know about it back in the day. And so you might have seen the most recent report from the Government Accountability Office said that 76,000 people have applied to get their loans forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
That means that in their accounting, they'd reached the 10 years of payment. And so we knew it was October of 2017 that the first group could have been could have reached the 120th payment, because the program started in October of 2007. Of those 76,000 applicants, Less than 900 have received forgiveness so far.
Less than 1%.
Exactly. So that's the big news that everybody's talking about, and the fear. In my book, and this is sort of a very common response that I give to folks that send me an email about, oh, did you see this news article? I've been doing this work since 2009, and every week, just like you say, there's something in the news about student loans, and often it's something that seems pretty critical or problematic, or bad news is sometimes easier to sell newspapers when you're telling bad news than good news. But so far, every time there's been some kind of a threat or perceived threat, my response after studying and doing the research on the issue has always been stay calm and carry on. And that is the same advice that I give to folks that are wanting to use public service loan forgiveness. Because today the rules are very clear, and it is very easy to find out if you are or if you're not qualified for that plan, and make some changes to get onto the plan if for some reason you haven't been on it yet.
Well, now, in that regard, for those people who thought they were taking out qualified loans only to find out later they were not, is there an option for them to refinance those into a public service loan forgiveness package and then pay out the 10 years and then be forgiven? Or is that just simply not going to happen?
It's totally an excellent option for people. Way to go, Randy.
Wow.
Totally. So if people have the wrong kind of loans, the payments they've made on those loans will not qualify.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have the option to apply for a direct consolidation loan with the federal government, not with a private bank, but with the same federal government. And then payments that they would make on those new loans on the right kind of repayment plan while working full-time for a qualifying employer, those will count towards the 120.
So if they are able to make that deal tomorrow, the clock starts tomorrow.
Exactly right.
And they have to make 10 years of payments. But if they do, the rest of the loan the rest of the debt is eliminated.
Yes, that's true.
Wow. Not such a bad idea.
Exactly. Not such a bad idea at all.
Well, that's more encouraging than some of the things that I've heard from the newscasters. And of course, they are a little inclined to shout fire in a crowded building, but it sounded like a really terribly desperate situation for a lot of people that really thought that their debt was about to be eliminated. And I can't imagine, having made payments on a loan for 10 years, thinking that it was going to be over, and then to be told, sorry, the rules changed. It's got to be terribly frustrating.
Do you have a minute for a story?
Sure.
So the same thing has happened to a number of our clients, and it is just devastating. The first time it happened was with the chief medical officer of an organization that had invited us in to serve as a benefit to their newly hired physicians. And so they were interviewing me, doing their due diligence to make sure that we were a group that they wanted to consult with. And they ended up entering into a contract with us, and we've been together now for many years. But about a year later, maybe not quite a year, I got a call from this chief medical officer who, at the time of the interviewing, he was asking some very, very good questions, which was sometimes unusual. And so he said to me, "Hey, Joy, I'm pursuing public service loan forgiveness." I thought, oh, this explains why he's so smart on this, right? And he said, "I only have 18 months left." So he was at, 102 payments. He said, "I have a whole spreadsheet of every payment I've made. It's always been on time for the exact correct amount. I still owe $150,000, and I'm so excited that in a year and a half, it's all going to be gone because I've got kids who are age, 10 and 11, and I got to be, saving for their college." And I was excited to help him with this. And he said, "Could you just take a peek and make sure that everything's good?" I said, "Sure, send over your list of loans. We'll just take a peek." He emailed them while we were hot on the line. I opened up his email. Oh, he had the wrong kind of loans.
Oh, my goodness.
He was one of those early adopters, way back in 2007, 2008. And no one had told him that you had to have a specific kind of loan, these direct loans. He had the older loans, the FFEL loans. And Congress said there was not very good information, but the law said that if you have those older loans, you could consolidate them into a direct consolidation loan, just as you had thought, Randy. But no one had ever told him. And so at this point in his career, he was making a lot of money, right? Because, right, he had advanced in his career and now he's, at a really good spot. And so when we ran the numbers for him, it did not make financial sense to start over at that point for another 10 years to make payments. And so he was going to have to pay off that $150,000 in its entirety. And he was steaming.
I can imagine.
We were thousands of miles apart over the phone, but I could see the steam rising off of his head over wherever it was. So he's now become one of our best referrers because he kept saying, why didn't anyone ever tell me? And so he doesn't want the folks that he's working with to have that same situation. But yeah, it is awful, 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 awful when that happens.
Well, I have to, I'm very confused about how that sort of failure to inform comes about. They're all, obviously I'm not an attorney, but it's my understanding that in many areas of law, most areas of law, that there is a duty to inform people when they're at risk. And it appears to me that the effort to do that was just absolutely absent. And there appears to be no one to hold accountable, which is very disturbing.
It is very disturbing. And that's just one of many stories. In fact, there are many lawsuits going through right now by states' attorneys general against the U.S. Department of Education for their failure to disclose, their failure to monitor, against some of the loan servicing companies. One of them has over 30,000 outstanding complaints. So this is an area that's fraught with trouble. And like you say, the law is clear. And when it hasn't been clear, there have been lawsuits to clarify it. But yeah, it's a big broken system right now.
Well, it is. I mean, it's encouraging to know that somebody is at least making an effort to hold someone accountable. But the problem I see is that when you look at the entirety of student loans, not just in the healthcare world, but it's my understanding that the entirety of student loan debt is about $1.6 trillion, more than double the Department of Defense. And, being able to find a source of money to cover that is not something that I would foresee happening, just because it's simply not there. So I foresee some continuing agony, but fortunately for people like you, there is help, and that's why we're happy to have you on the show, because there will be a lot of people listening to our podcast that will be very glad to get this information, and likely will be ringing your telephone, I should expect. Let me ask you about another possible solution. Are there jobs in healthcare where the employer will agree to assume some of that debt?
Great question. Absolutely. We work a lot with physician recruiters, in-house physician recruiters, and when I have the opportunity to speak with them at one of their conferences on this same topic, because they're wanting to be smart about student loans as they're trying to help candidates find a good fit within their organization. I always poll them about, how many of them offer some kind of a incentive or signing bonus that's directed specifically to their candidates, their physician candidates' student loans. And right now, about 2/3 of health system open physician positions are offering student loan incentives of some kind or another. The size of that incentive depends on location, like how tough it is to fill an open position.
I bet.
It also depends on, the field of medicine that someone's pursuing, the specialty, and the vacancies or the openings in those, shift over time depending on, how people choose to study and pursue different medical fields. But it's the smallest number that we see is about, $10,000. We sometimes see that in the world of family medicine in like Florida or New York or someplace where it's pretty easy to recruit. And we see upwards of $100,000 pretty commonly. Usually that's split up maybe $25,000 a year over 4 years or $20,000 a year over 5 years. So the physician would make a commitment to the organization for that number of years, get those dollars that they can apply to their student loans or something else once a year upon completion or at the beginning of that year of employment. The most I've ever seen was a very rural South Dakota position that had been open for 3 years. And a funny story here is that it was one of our clients, and before they accepted the position, they called me to make sure that the health system they were joining was eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And their incentive was $300,000.
Wow.
Not the salary, the one-time incentive for them to fill that position. And so the physician who was from Chicago said to me, well, he's going to negotiate, 5 days on and then like 1 week on, 1 week off. So he could live in 2 places, right? Raise his family in Chicago where they had all their friends and family, but, work in this rural South Dakota place. So a couple of years later, we were just checking in and I said, so how's it going? How are you liking this little town in South Dakota? He said, you won't believe it, but we fell in love with this community. And so he moved his wife and his kids to this very tiny little town in South Dakota. And they're raising a really happy family and going on some really nice vacations on some of their time off.
I'll bet they are.
Yeah. So that's that story that it really depends on what the opportunities are.
Well, I hope that there are a lot of those out there. I grew up a small town boy myself. And I have to say that I think the small towns have a great deal to offer. It's a different life, but I am in no way surprised that gentleman that you just described made the decision to make that switch, because there is something to say about the simple life.
I agree.
Another couple of things that we hear from time to time that I hope we can help people make some sense of. What is an income-driven repayment plan? I expect that's probably supposed to be self-explanatory, but just give us some details.
Isn't that funny? These federal government terms about student loans, you would think it would be self-explanatory, but the details are such that you go on the federal government's website, studentloans.gov, and you start reading, and pretty soon you reach a Y in the road, and you're wondering, oh, does this apply to me or does the other apply to me? Very difficult. So I'm glad you asked about income-driven repayment plans. So what would you guess, Randy? What is an income-driven repayment plan?
I would guess that the amount of your required payment is adjustable dependent upon your level of income.
Exactly. Bingo. So sometimes a physician thinks, oh, well, that must be some kind of a poverty program, right? Or a program for people that aren't making very much money. And physicians are making very decent money, and they still can benefit from an income-driven repayment plan, especially if they're pursuing public service loan forgiveness. Because if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, your goal is to make your monthly payments on time, make those payments, but make them on a plan where your payment would be less than your required plan. Because in that case, then you'd have money left over at the end, or balance left over at the end to be forgiven. And so when a student loan balance is relatively high and an income is high, it turns out that an income-driven repayment plan can be a very practical tool for even a physician. So there are multiple income-driven repayment plans. One that's called income-based repayment, another that's called pay as you earn, another that's called revised pay as you earn. And really the only way to figure out which one is best for you is to crunch the numbers and figure out, which one is going to be better for you today and over the life of the loan. And you can always switch plans if it makes sense for you. Sometimes we see individuals who, like we talked about earlier, that a lot of times people don't know what kind of field of medicine they're going to pursue or what kind of practice they're going to end up in. And so even in residency and even in the first couple of years of attending physician world, there are a certain number of people that aren't certain yet where they're going to land, right, for their career.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those, often we see them using the revised pay-as-you-earn repayment plan because it has this cool thing. It has something called an interest benefit. And the interest benefit, it says that if your monthly payment doesn't pay all of the accrued interest for that month, the federal government will pay half of that for you. So it's a really nice feature. And for physicians that are like in a transition period, I just spoke to a physician yesterday who had just had a baby and her husband was finishing up residency. She was attending physician, but they didn't know yet where they're going to be after he finished his training, right? And so she wasn't certain what kind of a job she was going to have. She knew what she was doing right now, but that was just for the next 20 months. And so we created a 3-phase plan for her for the next, few months to make sure she was making the right moves at each point. But she ended up using the revised pay-as-you-earn rather than refinancing to a lower interest rate. The interest subsidy was going to, because the federal government was paying half of that interest, it was as if she had a lower interest rate. And so that turned out to be a very good plan for her for the next 12 months. And then we have another plan for the next 12 months. And then they're going to call me back when they find out where they're going to land. And then we'll have the final plan.
Sounds like she went to the right person.
Oh, thank you. We love being a resource. We love working with physicians, and we found it's been really helpful that they can have the data they need in order to make a solid decision.
One thing that I think people might be confused about when they think about education loans, not only for healthcare, but for any reason, is there is, I think, an automatic tendency to think that those funds are being borrowed from a government source. But in fact, many times, and perhaps most times, you can tell me, we're talking about private lenders. Am I correct?
In about a third of the cases, people are getting private loans or refinancing with a private bank for a private loan. But today, since 2010, every student loan that's coming from the federal government is coming directly from the federal government, and it's being serviced under contract by a loan servicing company that has a contract with the federal government.
I see.
And so the loan servicing companies people will recognize will be Mohila, Navient, My Fed Loans, Great Lakes. There's probably 20 or maybe a little more than 20 loan servicing companies that have agreements with the federal government. Prior to 2010, it was, as you said, it was private banks were giving the loans and they were being underwritten by the full faith of the federal government. And so when Congress looked at the potential for student loan default, which was high then and is even higher today, they saw that the federal government was on the hook for over $63 billion with a B dollars of potential default that they would have to pay to these private banks. And that's when they changed how the lending would happen, that it would go directly with the federal government. And then they started a program like public service loan forgiveness.
And where I was going with that question was I was wondering if those loan servicing companies are always as knowledgeable as they should be about what they're selling. You have an opinion on that?
I do. I'm going to try not to swear on the podcast.
Well, it's not public broadcast, so we can be as naughty as we wish. So go ahead and tell me what you think.
Oh, it is so frustrating to be on the call. So one of the things that Navigate does, which sets us apart from other organizations like us, is that we'll actually make joint phone calls with our physician borrower customers and their loan servicing company. Often, a loan servicing company will have customer service representatives who are very good-hearted and well-intentioned, but perhaps not very long in their position, right? They've been trained, they may be working there for a few months or a year, and so they know a lot, but they don't know all the details. And in the world of physician student loans, because these loans are so big and there's so much money at stake, there are a lot of details that come into play, which aren't sort of common things that just, a regular borrower with $30,000 of student loan debt would have to be talking about. So often that frontline person you get on the phone will make a statement that's spoken in confidence, right? But it's incorrect. And it's the situation where they didn't know what they didn't know. So if I'm on the line with them, I know that it's incorrect. And so I can just gently say, well, thank you for that information. Is your supervisor available? And escalate it up to someone that has more experience. And it can be so frustrating for a physician. Physicians tell us, they've made multiple calls. You have to be on hold for anywhere from 2 to 30 minutes just getting a loan servicing rep to talk to. And then sometimes you're in the wrong department and then they have to transfer you to somebody else. And there's another 10 or 15 minutes. And then you get somebody and they give you the wrong information. You call back and you get a different opinion. It is just, and physicians are busy people, right? They don't have a lot of time.
So it sounds like you're describing one of those very typical customer service, a room full of pods with people sitting at computers with a script that they can read, and that's about all the knowledge they have about loan servicing. Am I getting that wrong?
No, that's exactly right. I haven't seen it, but I'm assuming it's pods. Yes,
that's kind of dangerous.
It is, and the one thing we have learned is when we have the right terminology, and there's one case where this is really in the weeds, Randy. I'm sorry to do this to you, but it is very common with physicians. So often physicians start on an income-driven repayment plan. Can I just tell you this? Because I think it might be of interest to some of your folks.
By all means, yeah, we want to hear what you have to say.
Okay. So they might start on an income-driven repayment plan while they're in residency, and then their payments will be relatively low. So we said that if you have $300,000 of student loans, your monthly payment might be $3,500. Well, in residency, if it's based on your residency salary, which is $50,000 to $60,000 these days, your payment might be $200 or $300 a month, which is very doable on a residency salary. When you become an attending physician, depending on what you're making, your salary could be anywhere from $1,500, or your payment anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 or more. But as physicians progress in their career, usually their incomes increase. We've been seeing a 3 to 5% increase over the last 3 years. And so what happens is at a certain point, the income-driven repayment is now up close to the standard payment, that $3,500. And when that happens on a certain repayment plan, there can be a cap on the payment of whatever the standard amount was, so the $3,500. So even though a physician will continue to make more money in the future, their monthly payment will never be more than that $3,500. Loan servicing companies are getting this wrong nearly 100% of the time.
My goodness.
It's because they don't see it often, right? Rarely do they see a regular borrower, a non-physician borrower with so much debt and so much income. And so they don't know how to manage it. But we've learned that the name of this is called the permanent standard repayment. And so somehow, and in fact, we even have we know the page number on their manual to tell them, please look up, Google or, search on your manual for permanent standard. And if you don't find it, it's on page, I don't remember it is off the top of my head, because we've had to work on this so many times with loan servicing company reps. So here's a little tip for folks, and you will have some folks that have been paying on their loans perhaps, for 5 or 6 years that might come into this problem. And so feel free to call us or shoot us an email. But if they're on the phone with their loan servicing company, what they want to be on is the permanent standard repayment.
The permanent standard repayment. That should be pretty easy to remember.
There you go. You've got the verbiage there. Perfect.
Well, Joy, this has been really fascinating. We have interviewed so many different kinds of professionals from the healthcare world. We've talked to doctors, to nurses, to hospital administrators, but you were the first non-clinical person that we have interviewed, and I must say, I think it may be the most enlightening of all the interviews that I've done on Prescription for Success, and I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
And before we go away, I'm going to give you a little chance to summarize. Typically, when we're interviewing physicians, we ask them to give us their own personal prescription for success at the end of the program. And what I'm going to ask you to do is give us a similar recipe for your recommendations for how perhaps people who are in medical school now should think about managing their debt, and even give a nod to the people in residency training and those people who are entering private practice. If you've got a little 1, 2, 3 recipe for them, we'd love to hear it right now.
Thanks for the opportunity, Randy. And I just really want to thank you for this podcast. I think it's fabulous when people can listen to their peers and other folks that have resources for them, and feel stronger in terms of their confidence in what may be coming ahead for them. So, Prescription for Success. I think when a person is in medical school, there really aren't a lot of options for student loans. Pretty much they're required to take out whatever they need for their education. And so at that point, my tip would be, don't worry about it. Don't think about it yet. Concentrate on your own health and well-being and what you're learning and how you're going to help the rest of us who are healthcare consumers. But don't worry about those student loans. The time to think about your student loans will be in those last 2 to 3 months of medical school. So we get a lot of calls from folks in April, May, and sometimes June, when people are starting to think about, okay, now I've got this debt. Now I have to start repaying this debt. What's going to be the smartest way for me to do that? And so that would be my tip. Just relax. Focus on the primary, which is education and your wellness. And then at the very end of your medical education, that would be the time to spend some time thinking about your student loans, doing some research. We love the White Coat Investor. The White Coat Investor is a blogger who's been around for probably a decade now. He's got a great forum on student debt, student loan repayment, lots of do-it-yourself kind of information there. I'm often watching what's happening and going on the forum to add my 2 bits about things. But the physicians on there that are active are very smart on student loans and very helpful. So I would definitely give that as a tip to look at this White Coat Investor blog and the forum specifically on student loans. And then the second tip I would have, and this would be both for the folks finishing up their medical education and also for physicians who are either in training or as attending physicians. I'm a big believer in getting good advice. And so there are a number of organizations like ours that give excellent tailored student loan advice for physicians. And our company, I think, does a terrific job of that too. And so what you're really looking for when you're going to be hiring someone to help you figure this out is someone that can give you the education, detailed information, education on your specific situation, and then the ability to calculate and crunch numbers for a variety of scenarios. And the top 3 or 4 organizations like ours, they will all do that for you. And because you want to be able to make some really important life decisions. And if you have a large student loan, that's going to impact your choice in many ways. And then the nice thing about finding someone to work with is that in so many cases we see, it just gives a sense of both accountability, because now you have someone that's working on this with you and is going to be helping you to meet your deadlines, a sense of confidence that you have done your research or had someone help you with the research. You've crunched the numbers and you know the options for your different scenarios or your different job offers even. These loan servicing or these groups like Navigate can help you with your different options related to your position offerings as well. And then the third thing that it gives you is just a sense of that you're not in this alone. You've got an expert in your pocket, as they say, someone to help you figure out what to do when life or career changes. So I think those would be my top tips for success related to student loans. And maybe the third one, which is just more broad, would be we sometimes see folks that are in residency and thinking about where they're going for the next career start to get so overwhelmed with their the heaviness of their student loan debt that they're tempted to make career decisions based on what's going to be best for their student loans. And what we find when we help people crunch the numbers, run the different scenarios, is that almost always, if you follow your heart, if you follow your guiding principles or the mission that you have for your own vocation and work, the money somehow will all work out. You can find a plan that'll work for you to let you have the career that you want, the family and life experience that you want, and still pay off those student loans. And so I think that would be my third tip on the prescription for success would be follow your heart and your mind in terms of your career selection, and then realize that with a good plan, you can manage these student loan decisions. That's it. What do you think, Randy?
There is nothing better than hearing somebody say it's going to be okay. That's exactly what you've done for us today, and we really appreciate that. So, Joyce Sorensen-Navarre, we appreciate you coming in to assure us that everything is going to be okay. A lot of our listeners are going to feel much better about what lies ahead for them, having heard what you had to say today, and we're really grateful that you took the time to come in and share that with us. Before we go, I would like to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find you and where they can find Navigate on the web or LinkedIn or wherever you would like for people to look. So give us some web addresses and let us know where we can find you.
Please visit us at www.navigatestudentloans.com. Or for individual advice, please shoot me an email, joy@navigatestudentloans.com. That's loans plural. Happy to answer your questions by email or to set up an individual time for us to talk more.
Thank you again very much, Joy. It has been a pleasure, and do have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Prescription for Success. If you'd like to subscribe to our show, please visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. That's rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, you can review the show notes and get more information about today's guest, as well as guests on other episodes. You can also leave us a comment or a question, and I'll be reading those on the air from time to time. And finally, if you'd like to help support our show and get access to members-only content, you can become a patron at patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. That's patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you so much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.